Thank you. Please sit down. Thank you. My name is Thomas Watson, and I am a presidential historian. My story begins in 2013 when I decided to pay tribute to the presidents of the United States by traveling to all of the presidential sites around the country where I photographed my Thomas Jefferson bobblehead at each site. I chose Jefferson because he's my favorite president. My goal was to bring presidential history to life by having Jefferson the bobblehead tell the story of each site, the history of the president, the history of that site, and other strange or interesting things that happened to us. In a nutshell, the show is presidential history through the eyes of Jefferson. Since 2013, Jefferson and I have traveled over 88,000 miles by car, boat, and airplane with no end in sight. So far, we visited 47 states and a handful of Canadian provinces. Our show is called Thomas Jefferson's Salute to the Presidents and will feature individual episodes for each president, starting with George Washington and continuing to the presidency of Donald Trump. This show you're watching now is the introduction, which I decided to use to introduce each president in order from worst to first, and that's according to my opinion. I truly believe that each man who served as our president did what he thought was best for our country. A lot of times they were successful, and sometimes they weren't. Before I get started with the introductions, I'd like to ask you to do Jefferson and I a huge favor. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. I'll do my best to personally reply to each one. We need your help to help our audience grow. So now, without any further delays, let the show begin. First president I'd like to introduce is James Buchanan. During Buchanan's term, 7 southern states left the Union, and Buchanan left Lincoln to deal with it. Because of that, James Buchanan is rated as the worst president in American history. Now coming to the stage is our number 2 worst president, Chester Arthur. Arthur was thrown into office after Garfield's death, and he butted heads with Garfield's entire cabinet. Due to Brice disease, he couldn't keep up with the presidency and was very ineffective. Because of that, Chester Arthur is the second worst president in history. Now at number 3, William Henry Harrison. Harrison had the longest inaugural address in history, but was too stubborn to wear a coat or a hat. He caught pneumonia shortly after and became the first president to die in office after only 31 days on the job. William Henry Harrison, I believe, is the third worst president in our history. Now, number 4, it's America's saddest president, and it's Franklin Pierce. He's viewed as the saddest president in history after losing all 3 sons before the age of 11. He had trouble making a decision on the slavery issue, and he killed the Missouri Compromise when he signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act into law, which was a terrible idea. Franklin Pierce is our 4th worst president. Next president on our list might come as a huge surprise. None other than Joe Biden. I believe Biden was a nice guy and a dedicated senator, but he became a horrible president by bowing to the woke agenda and being mentally unfit for the second half of his single term. Because of that, Joe Biden is ranked as the 5th worst president in our history. Now coming to our stage is none other than Lyndon B. Johnson. While LBJ passed some significant civil rights legislation, he did it solely for the black votes. But the main reason I rank LBJ as the sixth worst president because I believe he had a huge role in JFK's assassination. Because of that, Lyndon Johnson is our sixth worst president in history. Next up, Martin Van Buren. I dislike Van Buren solely because he continued Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act from 1830, and it was the worst example of mass genocide in our country's history. Martin Van Buren is our seventh worst president in history. Now taking the stage is our eighth worst president, Herbert Hoover. Hoover's single term can be described by three words: the Great Depression. That's enough for me to rank him as the eighth worst president in American history. Next at number 9 is Millard Fillmore. Fillmore signed the Compromise of 1850 into law as a way to avoid civil war. That compromise meant if a slave escaped and was caught, even in the free North, they were put on trial and likely sent back to their masters in the South. Millard Fillmore is our ninth worst president in history. Rounding out our top 10, John Tyler. Tyler became a traitor after he left the White House. He was elected to the Confederate House of Representatives, and when he died a short time later, Tyler was buried beneath the Confederate flag. John Tyler is our 10th worst president. Taking the stage now is Warren G. Harding. While Harding did put an arms limit on navies around the world and passed the federal child welfare program, his Teapot Dome scandal at the beginning of his term put him as my 11th worst president in history. It's Mr. Warren G. Harding. Coming in as our 12th worst president is our 12th president, Zachary Taylor. Taylor was a military man and a frontiersman, but I don't believe he was overly intelligent. Taylor died only 1 year, 4 months in office, and he was the second president to die in office. Zachary Taylor, our 12th worst president in history. Now for Lucky 13, and that might be a huge surprise, but it's Barack Obama. While the Affordable Care Act was an attempt to bring health care costs down for all Americans, Obama's second term was filled with a huge focus on race, and we saw the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, which divided our country. Barack Obama, our 13th worst president. Speaking of dividing our country, let's welcome to the stage Donald J. Trump. While he signed into law numerous bills which helped our nation become great again, I will never forget, nor should any American citizen ever forget, the January 6 riots and attack on our nation's Capitol building, only because he believed the 2020 election was rigged. Had it not been for that day, Trump would have been a lot higher on my list of successful presidents. Our 14th worst president in history, Donald Trump. Now we're at number 15, and that's none other than Benjamin Harrison. Harrison's a relatively insignificant president, but he did have more states join the Union under his presidency than any other, which was 6. That wasn't enough to keep Benjamin Harrison from being ranked as the 15th worst president in our nation's history. Now taking the stage as our 16th worst president is Grover Cleveland. Cleveland was the first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms and the only president to marry in the White House, albeit to a friend's daughter who was 28 years younger than him. And his second term was filled with tons of labor unrest. Grover Cleveland is our 16th worst president. That brings us to William Howard Taft. He was America's heaviest president and once may have gotten stuck inside a bathtub. He was better suited as a Supreme Court justice rather than president, which he did after leaving office. William Howard Taft is our 17th worst president. Taking the stage now at number 18, Rutherford B. Hayes. The first thing Hayes did when elected was end Reconstruction in the South. His biggest claim to fame, however, was banning alcohol from the White House. While his home is the closest site to where I live in Michigan, Hayes was really an insignificant president. That's why I rated him as the 18th worst president in history. It's on our list at number 19, John Quincy Adams. Even though Adams was the mastermind behind the Monroe Doctrine, he alienated his supporters once he got to the White House by his cabinet choices. His biggest claim to fame was skinny dipping in the Potomac River and getting caught. John Quincy Adams is the 19th worst president in our history. Rounding out our top 20 is Andrew Jackson. Jackson is a household name and a war hero, but he ranks as the 20th worst president because of his Indian Removal Act, which spawned the infamous Trail of Tears for the Cherokee tribe. Andrew Jackson, the 20th worst president in our history. Welcome to the stage as our 21st worst president, George H.W. Bush. Bush got into the White House on the coattails of Reagan as his vice president. And although he did oust Panama dictator Manuel Noriega, the last 3 years in office were lackluster. And that's likely because of his unkept campaign promise of read my lips, no new taxes. George Bush is ranked as the 21st worst president in history. Number 22 on our list is the man from Vermont, Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge was a middle-of-the-road president, and he took office after Harding's death. He was a quiet and recluse president, and he was nicknamed Silent Cal. A reporter once said Coolidge was silent in 5 languages. So be real quiet as Calvin Coolidge takes the stage as our 22nd worst president in history. We've reached the halfway point of our presidents. Coming in at number 23, Andrew Johnson. Johnson was a Southern Democrat slaveholder, but he did his best to uphold and support Lincoln's policies for Reconstruction after Abe's assassination. He was the first president to be impeached, but that was because he tried to oust the corrupt Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. Andrew Johnson, 23rd worst president in history. Taking the stage now as our 22nd best president is George W. Bush. Bush came across as not overly intelligent, but I thought he did a great job leading our nation after the 9/11 attacks. And I really liked his sense of humor. George W. Bush, the 22nd best president in history. 21st best president is our Michigan's own Gerald R. Ford. Even though he's a former Michigan Wolverine, I thought Ford did a great service to our nation by pardoning Richard Nixon after the Watergate scandal. However, I did not like his involvement with the corrupt Warren Commission in 1965. I think it was a knock on Jerry's integrity. But Gerald Ford is our 21st best president. Taking the stage as my 20th favorite president is Woodrow Wilson. He was accused of murdering his wife, Ellen, while in office. Then he married Edith Galt shortly after. But 13 months into his second term, Wilson declared war on Germany. He did help end World War I and help form the League of Nations, but he did nothing to help women's suffrage. I still rate Woodrow Wilson as our 20th best president. Coming in at number 19, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Ike was a World War II hero, and as president, he signed the bill to start the interstate highway system, which is still going strong today. Unfortunately, Eisenhower was not a huge fan of NASA, and he cut its funding. Dwight Eisenhower is my 19th favorite president. Now at number 18, might be a surprise that he's this high, Richard Nixon. Nixon would have rated even higher on my poll simply because he kept me out of Vietnam, but he was still the only president to resign from office because of the Watergate scandal. Nixon was also partially responsible for the Kent State Massacre on May 4th, 1970. Richard Nixon, our 18th best president. Now for number 17, and that's none other than Bill Clinton. While Clinton did initiate the Family and Medical Leave Act in 1993, his presidency was completely marred by the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which caused Clinton to be impeached. I only rate him this high because Bill and I share the same birthday. Bill Clinton, our 17th best president. Now taking the stage at number 16 is Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was a Civil War hero and helped save the Union. Grant was not a great president. He did a lot for civil rights in his first term, but the economy tanked in his second term. And he's considered to have the lowest IQ of any president. Ulysses S. Grant, ranked the 16th best president in history. Now we're to number 15, and that's Ronald Reagan. Reagan is considered godlike by most Republicans, but I didn't like his stance against unions during his time in office. I did like Reagan's sense of humor and his jokes, but his second term saw his mental state begin to decline, and it seemed like Nancy ran the country. Ronald Reagan, our 15th best president. 14th president coming to the stage now is William McKinley. I like McKinley mostly because we might be shirt-tail relatives, but I didn't like how he butted heads with Teddy Roosevelt, and he had a soft stance militarily. McKinley was the third president to be assassinated. Our 14th best president, William McKinley. Next up at number 13, lucky 13, is James Monroe. Monroe was one of our founding fathers, and I rated him this high because of the Monroe Doctrine, and he led the nation after the British burned Washington in 1814. Monroe helped refurbish the burned and gutted White House, and because of that, I ranked him as the 13th best president in history. Coming up at number 12 is one of our founding fathers, John Adams, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. His downfall, at least to me, was his arrogance and his infighting with Thomas Jefferson. I rated Adams this high because of his wife, Abigail Adams, who was very instrumental in the formation of our nation. John Adams, number 12 on our list of the best presidents in history. Just missing the top 10, coming in at number 11, is Harry S. Truman. Old Give 'em Hell Harry was impressive as the buck stops here. He didn't blame bad outcomes on others. Truman did make the difficult decision to end World War II by using the nuclear bombs in Japan in 1945. Harry S. Truman, our 11th best president. Made it to the top 10. And coming in at number 10 is James A. Garfield. Well, Garfield never had a chance as president because he was shot just 4 months into his term. I like the fact that Garfield was a hard worker who grew up in poverty and because of self-perseverance rose to the highest position in the land. James A. Garfield, our 10th best president. 9 on my list is Jimmy Carter. Carter was not an effective president because of our Congress and the Senate, but he was the most honest man to step foot in the White House since Abraham Lincoln. His humanitarian efforts and down-home persona, plus the fact that my wife and I, along with the bobblehead Jefferson, met Carter in person in 2019, ranks him as my 9th favorite president. It's Jimmy Carter. Please welcome to the stage someone who I believe was the most underrated president in history, James K. Polk. Polk promised to serve only one term, and he pledged to fulfill 4 campaign items. First, he planned to reestablish the independent treasury system. Second, Polk vowed to reduce tariffs. Third, he wanted to acquire some or all of the Oregon Territory. And lastly, he wanted to acquire California and its harbors from Mexico. Polk accomplished all 4 promises and walked out of the White House with his head held high, only to die 3 months later. James K. Polk is my 8th favorite president. Taking the stage alongside me at number 7 is our shortest president, James Madison. Madison is considered the father of the U.S. Constitution as he helped establish the Bill of Rights. In 1814, Madison had the courage to declare war against Great Britain because of all the bad things they were doing to our country. James Madison is my 7th favorite president. My 6th favorite president is John F. Kennedy. JFK is likely the most popular president in my lifetime. Kennedy formed the Peace Corps and had the courage to stand up against the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which avoided certain nuclear war. JFK was instrumental in NASA sending astronauts to the moon, but he became the 4th president to be assassinated. John F. Kennedy is my 6th favorite president. Oh, we've made it to the top 5. Coming in at number 5 is Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was perhaps the best man ever created to be president. He was a hands-on, boots-on-the-ground decision maker and tried hard to make a better America for all Americans. His efforts towards conservation and national parks in the forest were second to none. Teddy Roosevelt is my 5th favorite president. Now we're in the final 4. At number 4, General George Washington. Washington is considered the father of our country and was our first president. He presided over the Constitutional Convention, and he set the precedent for all presidents to follow. And even though there was no law against it, Washington thought 2 4-year terms was enough for one president to serve. George Washington, my 4th favorite president. Welcome to the stage, my third favorite president, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt was the only president to be elected to a third and fourth term. He led our nation out of the Great Depression and through World War II. But most of all, FDR was a compassionate president and fought to help disabled citizens, all the while trying to hide his own disability. Roosevelt was instrumental in the development of the polio vaccine, which unfortunately came after his death. Franklin Roosevelt is my third favorite president. My second favorite president is Abraham Lincoln, the savior of our Union who gave his life to keep our country united. Lincoln served his entire presidency during the darkest times our country ever faced, and only 5 days after the Civil War ended, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. While Lincoln is at the top of a lot of historians' lists, Abe ranks as my second favorite president. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, number one. That's right, it's Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson is my favorite for a lot of reasons. One, at the age of 33, TJ wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence. He was also an architect, inventor, meteorologist, botanist, surveyor, statesman, writer, and that's just to name a few things. He's likely the most brilliant mind to ever serve as president, and the only thing people talk about today is he was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson was more than just a slave owner. Well, that's it for our first show. I sincerely hope you found it interesting and will tune in to our next episode featuring the life of George Washington. Please do us a favor and subscribe, like, share, and leave us a comment. It'll help our audience grow. Thank you for watching and take care.